sure I know who you are, Mr. Wilson. Okay, you're Mr. Wilson. Okay, great. Okay, you can have a seat. All right, so Mr. Wilson, you're before the court. Warrant 23W008293. The first warrant, you have two warrants. The first one charges you with aggravated assault with a weapon. The warrant alleges you did make an assault upon the victim with a homemade edged weapon, a deadly weapon, or any object when used offensively is likely to or actually does result in serious bodily harm by attacking the inmate, causing multiple deep lacerations. And you're also charged with unlawful acts of violence in a penal institution. And then we have Mr. Dupree. Mr. Dupree, you're charged with aggravated assault. Your warrant to 23W00829798. And all of these incidents happened in DeKalb County Jail. You're all currently already in for other offenses. And in this case, you're charged with the aggravated assault toward the victim as well. And you're charged with unlawful acts in a penal institution. And these incidents happened on May 24, 2023. All right, with that being said, if the state's ready, I believe we just want to make sure Officer Batista or Deputy Batista, if you could come on, please. And just make sure that we don't use the victim's name, just the initials in the proceedings. All right, and if you could unmute for me, please. And are we to refer to you as Deputy Batiste?
I'm Sergeant Batiste.
Sergeant Batiste. Thank you for the clarification. Okay, Sergeant Batiste. Okay. With that being said, Ms. Bruce, are the states ready? You can proceed at this time.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant, can you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth under penalty of perjury?
I do.
Thank you. Please state your name for the court.
Sergeant A. Batiste,
Where are you employed?
DeKalb County Sheriff's Office.
And how long have you been with the sheriff's office?
11 years.
And are you post-certified?
I am.
And were you post-certified when you took out these warrants?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And what were the facts and circumstances that led to your involvement in this case?
It's called to the floor for a fight between four. It involved a 3-on-1 situation. By the time I got to the floor, Sergeant Brown had already taken the victim out. So we got to the floor. We were working on another situation in the jail. So they treated that victim and sent him out. He had to go out EMS because it was pretty deep lacerations. After that, later on, we came back. We usually bring everybody back and take everybody down separately so they can be seen by medical. And then we conducted a search of the pod.
And what did the search of the pod reveal?
The search of the pod revealed an edged weapon. And of course, they all had edged weapons. We just couldn't find them all. But we did find one.
And whose pod did you find that in?
It was in pod 500. That's the pod containing the 3 defendants.
Now, you mentioned the victim had to be transported to deep lacerations, or because of deep lacerations, excuse me. Where were those lacerations?
On his neck, on both sides. One was pretty deep on his neck. I don't know. It was a lot of blood, so I don't know.
You said you responded, but Sergeant Brown had responded first. Did you interact with co-defendant Dupuy and Williams or Wilson? I'm sorry.
I believe we did. We did. At that point, we brought everybody out, put them on the wall, and began searching the pod. Lieutenant deemed it necessary to put defendant Wilson to segregated administrative segregation right away. And the other 2 we were going to deal with JDC.
And why was it determined he needed to do that?
Because he was the actual one with the weapon, while the other 2 were engaging. This is all revealed from video footage. While the other 2 were engaged with the victim, had him on the ground, inmate Wilson was cutting him, basically. And Lieutenant decided they were going to put him in the administrative segregation right away.
Now, you mentioned this was all seen on video surveillance.
Yes.
Can you describe what you see in that video?
Initially, it seems like the victim hit inmate Wilson with something. It didn't knock him down, but he did hit him. And he got up, started chasing the inmate around the victim around the pod, and the other two inmate Bonds and Dupuy joined in, engaged with him. And when they got him down, that's when inmate Wilson started.
So once the victim was on the ground that was being held down by Dupuy and Barnes, that Wilson started stabbing him or hitting with the edged object?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Wilson have any injuries?
No, ma'am.
And has that video been preserved?
It has been.
And when you said the there was the other two were engaging him prior to him being on the floor, how would you what do you mean by that?
They started. They caught him because he was running from Wilson, so they caught him and started fighting, and then got him to the ground, and that's when Wilson came up and started cutting, basically.
How long was the victim on the ground?
It had to be maybe seconds. When I say seconds, probably about 30 to 40, 50 seconds.
Did any of the co-defendants make any statements?
I don't believe they did. They might have made statements to the JDC hearing, but not to mine, not to me.
Okay. And what did y'all do with the object you found in the pod?
It's in the supervisor's office.
And the incident location was in DeKalb County?
Yes, ma'am.
And how were you able to determine the identities of the two co-defendants for this that are before the court today?
From the testimony from the housing officer, he identified them, but then the camera's pretty clear.
And that's the information you used to obtain the warrants?
Yes, ma'am.
Nothing further, Judge.
Okay, so Miss Levy, we'll start with you, please. You can proceed with your cross-examination, your witness.
Thank you. Good morning, Sergeant Baptiste. My name is Stacy Levy. I represent Mr. Wilson. How are you today?
I'm well, ma'am.
Cool. So you got called to a fight. Where were you when you were called?
I believe I was in medical at the time.
Okay. And who called you?
And we were called via radio by the housing operator.
By the housing operator?
Yes, ma'am.
Is that someone who's in the pod?
He's in the tower. He's not actually in the pod.
In the tower that's in the middle of the pod. There's a tower and then there are pods.
Correct.
Okay.
There's a tower by 6 pods.
Okay. And what's his name?
His name is Technician Martin.
Martin?
Yes, ma'am.
So how many operators are there in the tower?
There's one.
And he's overseeing 6 separate pods. Is that right?
Yes. Yes,
Okay.
ma'am.
How many people are in pod 5?
You know, at the time, I think there might have been about 18 or no, excuse me. I think there might have been 10 at the time. I'm not sure. It goes
Say it one more time.
probably about 10 at that time.
Okay. And how many surveillance cameras are facing and recording inside of pod 5?
2.
And when you were called by technician Martin, what did he say?
Usually just called as a fight pod over radio. They say it's a fight. Signal 27, the floor in 8 Northeast, pod 500.
Okay. How many people usually come when there's a fight?
It depends. Like I said, at that time, I was busy with dealing with something else. I think it was about four supervisors on the floor. So Brown went up to take care of it. She pulled the victim out. And then when we had time, we went back to deal with the rest of it.
Okay. Were you all wearing body cam?
No, ma'am.
Nobody wears body cam?
We're rolling out the body cam system right now, but at this point, we do not wear them.
Okay. And you said you didn't take any statements from any of the 3 gentlemen that got detained.
I believe we did. We usually ask, do you want to write a statement? And usually the response is no.
Okay.
I am not in the office. I'll have to go back and check and see.
So there may be statements. Would
There
they
may be.
Would they be recorded or written?
They're always written.
Okay. And so there are 10-ish people, and you're saying that 4 people were involved in the incident. Were statements taken? Do you have the names of the other people that were in the pod?
At this time, I don't.
Have they been taken down by someone during an investigation to speak with them?
No, we did not speak with them. We knew who they are at the time. All I have to do is print out the history, and it will tell me exactly who was in the pod on that day.
Great.
But no, we didn't speak with them. We only spoke to the parties involved.
But if you print out a history, it can tell you exactly who was in that pod.
Yes, ma'am.
What is Mr. JM in the alleged victim? What's he in jail for?
Judge, I'm going to object to that. That's not relevant to probable cause. You're on mute, Judge.
I know. It tells me, thank you though. Miss Levy, what's the purpose of that question?
Just interested if he's in jail for a violent crime.
Yeah, I guess for the reason of this incident, I'll let you answer the question. Do you know what he's in for, the victim?
I believe everybody in that pod is in jail for the same thing.
Which is what?
I believe all of them have murder charges.
Okay.
Guys, give me one moment, please. Miss Levy, give me just one moment. Sorry for the interruption. Please.
Thank you, officer. Okay, I think we stopped pod 5, 10 people, all charged with murder. You didn't see how the fight started, is that right?
From the video, what I can see is the victim hit inmate Wilson with something.
Okay.
And
you don't know what it was.
Right. If anything started before that, I'm not sure. But
okay. Is the video consistently running?
It is.
So you can get like an hour before, an hour later, get the whole thing?
Yes, ma'am.
And that whole thing has been uploaded to evidence.com or given to the district attorney's office in some way?
It should be attached to the report.
Okay. So you say that the JM, because we're not using his name, hit Mr. Wilson with something, but you don't know, you can't see what it is in the video?
No, I can't see what it is.
But it's an
Just
object.
like I couldn't see exactly what Mr. Wilson was holding, but we do know it did a considerable amount of damage.
Okay. So, and you said, so when JM hit Mr. Wilson with something, he fell down?
No, he did not fall down.
Oh, I thought you said he got back up and
He
JM.
he was sitting down at the time. He was appeared to be sitting on the toilet in the day room, and that's when he hit him. So he got up. I'm not sure what was.
So he's sitting on the toilet and gets hit
Right.
while just sitting on the toilet.
Right.
Okay, would you agree with me that JM is the
Correct.
primary aggressor here?
Judge, I'm going to object to that question. That's legal determination.
It's a problem.
Hold on, everybody. Hold on. Let me respond. Okay, your question, repeat your question first. Sergeant Batiste, hold on a second for me, okay? All right. So your question was, go ahead.
That JM is the primary aggressor since my client is sitting on the toilet.
Okay, and then the state's objecting, and what's your response to the relevance? Perhaps rephrasing your question would be helpful, attorney.
Okay, so my Sergeant. Sergeant, so in the video, you can see my client sitting on the toilet. Is that right?
Yes, ma'am.
Are his pants down, like down at his ankles, because he's actually using the toilet?
I cannot see that for privacy
You can't
reasons.
tell
We
whether
can't
that-
see that.
You can't tell whether or not his pants are down.
No, ma'am.
Okay, and as he's sitting on the toilet, somebody, JM approaches him and hits him with something. So not just his hand, something is in his hand.
I don't know what it was. He hit him,
Okay,
and then, but you have to know that in this type of, they're playing all the time. So you never know if someone's playing or if this is real. If you understand what I'm saying.
I understand what you're saying.
Okay.
But you would agree that my client was simply sitting on the toilet and was not affirmatively hitting JM.
Correct.
Okay, so JM started this situation. Is that fair to say?
Judge, I'm going to object to that question. That is a legal determination.
And we're here to make a legal determination of probable cause as to whether my client is guilty of aggravated assault and unlawful something in a penal institution.
Okay, so hold on a second. Again, when there's an objection, you guys let me at least respond to it. I think in this case, Ms. Levy, you've made an argument. You presented, you're at the, Sergeant Batiste has indicated that your client was, in the bathroom and that the victim went up to him. And I think that's kind of clear.
Okay.
I think it's fair for you to ask the Sergeant Batiste, the witness, whether or not he has an opinion based on the observation of whether or not your client or the victim may have instigated or started. I think that's a fair question. So I'm going to let you ask that.
Sergeant Baptiste, can you tell me, in your opinion, who was the initial instigator in this incident?
I'm sorry, you broke up, Sergeant Batiste. Can you repeat that?
I said the victim was.
Okay. And have you had any prior contact with Mr. Wilson before that day?
Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me about that?
I was the supervisor on the floor. I had contact with everybody on the floor.
So hold on, Sergeant Batiste, that wherever that room is that you guys use with this, I don't know if that's a green screen. It starts it starts breaking up.
I'm in a totally different. I'm actually in a totally different place, Judge. I am out of state.
Oh, you're out of state. Okay, well, we can hear you now. It's adjusted a little bit, so
Yeah.
you can go ahead and proceed, please. Go ahead.
All right, so you have had prior, I'm so sorry. You've had prior contact with him
I
because
was the supervisor.
and had you had
I was the
occasion,
supervisor.
okay, so I actually want to go back for a second. You said JM was the primary aggressor at something in his hand. Did you ever find out what he had in his hand?
Just for the record,
I didn't hear what you.
hold on. Just for the record, he didn't say he was the primary aggressor. He said he
Primary
initiated.
instigator.
Yeah. So,
Did you ever find out what he had in his hand?
No, ma'am.
Did you ever ask him?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And when you got to the situation, did Mr. Wilson have a weapon in his hand?
No, ma'am.
Where was the, you said it was what did you say you found?
It was a sharp metal object.
You found a sharp metal object in pod,
Yes,
in
ma'am.
pod 5. Where exactly in pod 5?
It was in Pod 500. I'm not sure exactly where they found it because I didn't find it. It was while we were conducting the search, and I'll have to go back into my notes or talk to the other officers and find out where they actually found it.
Okay, and to be clear, there were
But
10
they're always hiding it. They're either. Yes, ma'am.
and to be clear, there were 10 other people in that pod.
At least.
Okay, and you found
Yes,
a sharp
ma'am.
object, but you didn't actually find something that Mr. Wilson was hit with.
No, ma'am.
And you said that you had contact with Mr. Wilson before because you were the supervisor in that pod. Had you had any?
On the,
what
at
are you
the time,
saying?
I was the floor supervisor.
Okay, and so
At the time,
you go. What were you saying? I'm trying not to interrupt you, Sergeant. I'm trying to, but every once in a while you freeze up. So I don't want you to think I'm being rude and trying to interrupt you, okay? Had you had experience where you had to discipline or where Mr. Wilson was disciplined by you prior to this incident?
Judge, I'm going to object to that. Going into prior interactions is not relevant for the charges before the court.
Judge, I would say it's relevant because if they have a history, and if Mr. Wilson has some type of disciplinary history, it could be why he's charged and not the primary instigator.
I think for this hearing, it's relevant for the purpose of any interaction with primarily the two parties involved, the victim and your client. But just as general overall history, I think that's more appropriate for the trial.
I was just asking about this situation. Well, let me ask you, Sergeant, was JM the primary instigator? Was he charged?
no, he was not, ma'am.
Okay. And so had you had a situation where you were involved in a disciplinary situation with Mr. Wilson?
Not that I know of. I can't remember. I'm involved with a lot of people. I can't remember if I was in a disciplinary situation with him.
Okay.
Can I tell you the reason why I charged?
Absolutely.
Because had it been a regular fist fight, I probably would have charged the victim. Because of what transpired and the degree to the injuries, that's why they were charged.
And I just want to make one thing clear. Technician Martin is who called about the fight. Sergeant Brown took JM out because of his injuries. And then you were still there and maybe two other deputies?
We were in the building at the time. At the time of the fight, I arrived well after the victim had been taken out. And when I saw that there was nothing else right then, I left because we're running from call to call, believe it or not. And then after a while, we came back to this. That was Lieutenant's call. He said, when everything settles down, we'll go up there and search.
Who were the officers that broke up the fight?
The Sergeant Brown, when she got to the floor, and it's all in the video. When she got to the floor, she told them to get back, and she pulled the victim out the pod.
Okay, so sort of single-handedly, she got everyone to separate. And when she got,
I believe at that time they had already self-separated, or maybe they separated when they saw her walking on the floor.
okay, Was Mr. Wilson cooperative?
Yes, ma'am.
Did Mr. Wilson have any injuries?
No, ma'am.
Who checked him out after JM was taken out?
After it should have been medical, he should have been taken to medical after JM was removed from the area. Then we bring the other parties of the fight in.
So he went to medical after JM was moved?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. All right, I have no further questions. Thank you so much, Sergeant.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And Miss Ness Maddox, your witness with regard to your client, Mr. Dupree.
Thank you, Your Honor. Sergeant, I'm going to try to not rehash everything that you've already covered, just kind of filling in some things. So, of course, you mentioned that Sergeant Brown was the one who broke up the fight. You mentioned the lieutenant a few times, but I didn't catch the lieutenant's name. What was their name?
It should have been Lieutenant Young. It was Lieutenant Young.
Okay. And just to be... Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
I know Lieutenant Everett was also present.
And just so I understand the situation with the object seen in the video and found in the pod. So what was found in the pod somewhere was a sharp metal object, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Could you tell in the video what object Mr. Wilson appeared to have in his hand? Any sort of description?
No, ma'am.
Okay. And to be clear, the weapon never changed hands. It was always in Mr. Wilson's possession that you saw in the video?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And I assume that because the other members of the pod were not interviewed, you aren't aware of any other witnesses to the incident other than the people involved?
I'm pretty sure they were all witnesses. It's just a matter of who wants to speak, and no one will actually speak.
Are you aware if Mr. Dupuy knew JM at all before this interaction?
I'm sure they knew each other because they lived in the same housing area, but to what extent, I don't know.
Okay, but they were in different pods, right?
No, they're in the same housing area.
They were in the
pod.
same. They were in the same pod. Okay.
Yeah, not in the same cell, but the same pod.
Okay. So then on the same ticket, the other co-defendants, you assume, would have known JM as well.
Yes, ma'am.
And you briefly discussed whether you'd had disciplinary situations with Wilson. Do you recall any disciplinary situations with Mr. Dupuy?
I did not know his name at all until the technician told me who it was.
Okay. You were the supervisor of the
Yes,
area,
ma'am.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. Did you know who the other people involved were before the incident?
I know the other person, Mr. Barnes, but I did not know Mr. Dupuy. The reason being, we're looking at a floor with about 50, 60, 70, it fluctuates. I'm also over 7 East, which is another 200 plus inmates, and 6 East, which is another 400 inmates, give or take.
Okay. So you mentioned the medical care that JM received. Do you know how long he was in?
He was in the hospital, if I remember, before After that, he was in our infirmary for a while.
Okay, you broke up when you were saying how long you'd been in the hospital. Did you come again?
He's been in the I believe he stayed in the hospital for about a week. I got to go back and check and see that, but he was in the hospital for a while, and after that, he was in our medical unit for a while.
Okay. Were you aware of any injuries on Mr. Dupuy?
No, it was not.
And no further questions. Thank you, Sergeant.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Broussard, does the state have any redirect?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Ms. Levy, do you have any recross?
No, Your Honor.
Okay. Any argument on the charges? If so, you can proceed at this time.
Judge, I'd ask that the charges against my client be dismissed. He's clearly not the primary aggressor and he has a right to defend himself.
Okay, thank you. And I'll let the state respond. Ms. Broussard, with regard to Mr. Wilson.
Yes, Your Honor, you heard testimony today that the victim ran away after he did hit Mr. Wilson, and the other two parties engaged him throughout the pod and then got on top of him, and Mr. Wilson was stabbing the victim with a sharp object that caused deep lacerations and sent him to the hospital for a week. Judge, there was no injuries on any other person. Any claim of self-defense, Judge, is a question for the trier of fact to determine at trial. Judge, based on the evidence today, the state believes that we have met our burden for probable cause because Mr. Wilson was stabbing the victim while he was laying on the ground being held by the two co-defendants.
Okay, thank you. With regard to Mr. Wilson, just for the probable cause, sir, the standard is just to see if there was enough evidence to have arrested you. And I do believe there was enough evidence to have arrested you, but of course your attorney can proceed with any other acts of any other issues at trial, including self-defense or anything of that nature. But I do find there's enough evidence or probable cause to have arrested you and charged you with the aggravated assault and the penal institution violation. So we'll go ahead and hear. I thought it was Mr. Dupree. That's me from Louisiana. You know, we know Dupree's a common name, so I've been calling him Mr. Dupree, but it's Mr. Dupuy, which is interesting. So with regard to Mr. Dupuy, Ms. Ness Maddox, I'll hear from you if you have any argument, ma'am.
Yes, Your Honor. I would just like to emphasize that Mr. Dupuy never had an object in his possession that was used as a weapon. The object that was found in the pod could have belonged to any of the other 9 people in the pod, particularly Mr. Wilson, who did have an object in his hand during the incident. It's noteworthy that Mr. Dupuy and the others self-separated after the incident and after Sergeant Brown appeared. So we would argue that the warrant should be dismissed because there's no evidence that Mr. Dupuy was in possession of a weapon at any point. And so there's insufficient evidence that he assaulted the alleged victim with any object likely to result in serious bodily injury.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Broussard, state's response.
Thank you, Your Honor. The state would argue we have met our burden. You heard testimony that Mr. Dupuy was being held on the or was helping hold the victim on the ground while he was being stabbed by Mr. Wilson, Judge, and was a party to that and engaged in that act. So the state would argue for a probable cause. We have met our burden.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Ness Maddox, for probable cause for party to a crime, or do you find there's enough evidence or probable cause to have arrested your client as holding him down party to a crime? So with that being said, I do find probable cause on both cases. And Sergeant Batiste, thank you for joining us, even though you're out of town. Some people go out of town and don't make that effort. So I greatly appreciate you as a judge. So we have to reset all these cases, but we do have one case that we'll have to reset in the future, and we'll let you know when we're going to proceed with that case. Okay.
Okay, ma'am.
All right. Take care and have a good vacation or time away. All right. Well, that concludes our hearing for the 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock. And